Welcome to the Cedar Falls Committee of the Whole meeting this August 5th, 2019. I'll now call this meeting to order. We have 5 items listed for tonight's committee meeting: Library Board of Trustee interview, the College Hill parking study, information systems update, on-street parking of trailers, and bills and payroll. First up, I'd like to invite Charles Blair Broker to the podium, if you will, and let's give a brief introduction of yourself and open it up for questions from the council. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Blair Broker. I've been a member of this community since the mid-1970s. Taught at Cedar Falls High School for 36 years, and have been looking recently for ways to contribute to the community that I didn't have time for before. So that was my primary purpose in applying for the library trustee position. I believe in libraries. I like libraries. I have wonderful childhood memories of libraries back in suburban Minneapolis. And would just like to be able to serve in this capacity.
Awesome, thank you. I will open it for council for questions.
Thanks.
Are there any particular initiatives that you'd like to see the library take on?
Nothing specific. I view my role at first as one of learning, mostly. I've gone back and read through minutes of the past several meetings and looked at many of the library materials that are present. I was just talking to Kelly a little bit. I'm impressed with the new and different things that the library is attempting to do. And at first, I think I just want to stay out of the way and work at whatever capacity I can.
Very good. Thanks for stepping up.
Anything further from council? Mr. Burr.
It was a pleasure to meet you at the pre-interview, and thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks. Moving on to the next item is the College Hill parking study. Did to have John Forrester come up, please, the parking consultant, and has a presentation for us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to be back in Cedar Falls.
Just make sure that microphone's right there, if you would. Just, yeah, it should
All
be
right.
good. Yeah.
Sounds good. Sound good now?
Now you sound good.
Let's see. There we go. Just to run through the background of what we worked on the study, we did parking counts, morning, afternoon, evening parking counts. We did an online survey. We did interviews with business owners, representatives from UNI, the College Hill Partnership, and others. And then we have had 2 public input meetings, and I know some of you have been at that. I see familiar faces, so thanks for your participation during that. And so we did the counts while school was still in, obviously. So we've been working on this for a few months. Just a brief update of the parking counts. Morning counts were the busiest time, 10 a.m. The streets were full of cars where they were allowed. So the lots were full. You can see on here the red is over 90%. The metered lot obviously didn't get used really that much, and everything else is free, so that makes sense why that happens. It really does peak around 10, 11, and then 2 in the afternoon it starts to actually dwindle a little bit. And then in the evening we came on a Thursday night, which is supposed to be a night of Thirsty Thursday, where it's fairly busy. And then the lots did fill up, but the streets were fairly empty at that point in time. So you do have some changing dynamics out there as to what's going on and how it's working. Really a little smaller area than downtown, so you kind of really need to target things a little bit more. You have less players. Users with high familiarity, students, faculty, staff, all sorts of people who are there all day, every day, a little less likely to comply with regulations. It's human nature. We all do it. Really, the demand there is driven by UNI. Without UNI, you don't really have anything else up there. And so you kind of have an odd dynamic, is they charge for parking and the city has free parking, and so people do drift towards the free parking. That's just a normal thing that people will do. And we'll take a look at a map here a little bit, but the center of campus is actually closer to the city parking areas than they are to the UNI parking areas. So on top of being paid, proximity is an issue as well. Just currently what's going on there are hundreds of spaces on the streets. There's 5 public parking lots that have over 160 spaces in them. It's a fairly active area. It's an area to be proud of, kind of a fun place to be. But there is already good sound parking policy established. As I said before, people who are there every day, people who live there, students, that can be a tough crowd to work with. Good regulations and consistent enforcement are just the key to making things work. And here's that map I was saying. And there's kind of the center of campus a little bit, and then your city's just right there, and then all the parking's out west of campus. And so that's where kind of things get thrown off a little bit, is you got proximity and price working against you, and you're naturally going to have people parking in the city parking areas. So then that's where good policy and good enforcement are the key. And working throughout this, some of the goals were well, we'll go on to that right here. The goals were, to utilize public parking to promote economic and neighborhood vitality. We really want that to be a place where people want to go, but also, I tell people, free parking's great as long as there's some available. Free spot's worthless if it's always full. So you want people to be able to go up there, find a parking spot, and be part of the community and be able to do that. Sound public safety policy, you have to have access for your emergency vehicles. Snow and ice control is always an issue. We kind of worked from the beginning on this to try to see if there was a way to make sure we kept the parking up there low or no cost as much as possible, and to not monetize the area. Okay. And then to actually work with some of the downtown plans and coordinate the parking solutions. Not that they be the same, but that there's coordination across the city so people have one place to call. And really also, if we're not going to charge, to try to keep that overhead and administrative complexity down, because the more you do, there's a cost. And if you're not charging for it, there's no way to offset those costs. It just becomes a more expensive entity to run. So having looked at all that and considering the goals and considered everything, we came up with some recommendations for the city. Data is key. And having good, actionable data is important. So we're recommending, same as we did downtown, regular parking occupancy counts, so you know where you're at. The area is busy, but it hasn't reached a tipping point. But it can get there if dynamics change. And so it's important to have that information, have those data counts available. And that allows you to periodically reassess your time limits, no parking, other regulations. Same thing as you're considering downtown, and over time, if things change, if it becomes busier, you may have to change policy and do things a little different. Look for opportunities for long-term changes. The zonings, I know you had some zoning changes up there, and apartments now that go in have a requirement for 1 space per bedroom. Just keep an eye on your zoning. If you do change any zoning policy in the area, that would either increase density or increase parking requirements, you're undoubtedly going to have to make some changes up there, because you are right about at 80% occupied, which is a very efficient place. It's a great place to be. It means you're full enough that it's being used and people are coming, but not so full that it's impossible to find a last spot. And then just, utilize current regulations. I do think you need a little more enforcement up there, a little more regular enforcement, and a little more on the weekend, and just keeping an eye on things. So one of the physical changes we say, so Lot G, which is, let's see, does this work? I'm going backwards. There we go. Lot G, anyway, is a 2-hour lot right now. I'm recommending you change that to a pay lot, a metered lot, where people would have to pay to park in it. I think that should be your primary visitor lot in the area. It's where people should look to go when they come to the area, because it's near everything. Lot J is a metered lot right now. I said is underutilized. G gets abused because it is free and it's 2 hours, and you can park there, get to campus, and get back in less than 2 hours. So you're really kind of using it as a service lot for the university. It doesn't need to be that. It really should be serving the Hill area more. So recommending that become a paid lot. You do need to continue to monitor that, though, for fees and time limits. Make sure it works the way you need to. At this point, I said just charge till 6. There's really no reason to charge it in the evening, but if evening activity were to pick up where you could no longer find a spot in the area, maybe you would want to extend those hours to 7, 8, or 9 to do that. And then lot J and N become, I would keep J as a metered lot as well, but also put permits in N and J, because you do have a number of permits sold in the area now, and it provides an opportunity for those lesser used lots to really be available for people. Continue to allow overnight parking. We talk about that throughout. Is the right thing to do. Someone shouldn't be driving, let's let them have an opportunity not to. 24-hour limit in those lots. You do need to get those cleared out occasionally. Snow and ice control, or just people just storing cars. You start charging in G and writing tickets, and then using your back-end enforcement policy, that lot will clear out more often for sure. Again, a little more enforcement, a little more variation in timing, and like I said, firm and fair parking enforcement is what's necessary in college neighborhoods. You have a great partner up there in UNI, and I've spoken with them, and they've actually come to the open houses that we did have to be there and see. They've got a lot of parking. They've got their garage that they've built there, plus they've got all the parking west of campus. And I think you need to team with them a little more. I kind of run through things, but to get to the bottom bullet point on this slide, what you really want to work with UNI is so that no one overbuilds parking. They don't want to have giant parking lots that sit empty. You don't want to tear down some buildings or clear some space that you don't really need on the hill. The real goal with working with UNI is to make sure that everything gets filled to 90% pretty consistently before anybody builds any more parking. And so teaming together, you can do that. And doing payments in Lot G, you're going to push some of those people who are using that as a short-term lot to go to campus. Well, they're going to move back onto campus now, or park in the garage, or doing something like that. So you're starting to do that. But really to work with them to really partner and make sure you get the most out of the parking for the whole area, because they own a whole lot more parking than the city does, so it's important to work with them on that. Facilities aren't in great shape. They could use a little work, both from just appearance that the city is concerned about them, but also just reduce liability from slip and falls. There is some stuff happening now, street lighting improvement program that's underway, and you just want to continue to strengthen those connections from those lots or behind the buildings, strengthen the pedestrian connections to them, the sidewalks, the lighting, make it feel very comfortable for people to go from the lots to the buildings they're going to, and work to get those snow piles cleared. It's always a pain. I was a parking operator for several years. I know what it's like to get snow piles out of parking lots. It's not easy. You got to get all the cars moved, but continue to work on that. And again, kind of a time frame for that. I think within the year you could put the multi-space stations in G and J. Same thing you're putting in your lots here downtown, and really just to kind of expand that program. And now, as I say that, it's a different timeline. It's a different animal. You have to consider things differently, but you can build off each other. Work on those regular occupancy counts. We looked at a possible Uber, Lyft bus stop loading zone on West 22nd. I think you should look into that a little more to see if there's an opportunity for that to be a drop-off pickup zone. Adjustments and enforcement. And then as you're working through some of the recommendations for the downtown plan, which included updating the website and different media, continue to push that through to College Hill. I think those things are very easy. You want people to feel like I can go to the city website on parking and I can find out about anything across the city. Longer term may be those some of those physical changes, the resurfacing of lots G and J, and the wayfinding. I mean, not the wayfinding, but the pedestrian linkages. And then, I didn't see any problems. I didn't hear any, but it seemed to me that a little better markings around the driveways might be helpful, and I think you should probably trial that on at least one street. Murner's probably one of the busiest ones with a lot of curb cuts. There's a lot of cars right up next to the edge of the curb cuts, and I don't, you get your car dinged doing that, and that's not a great feeling. So I'm not a fan of marking every single spot in a neighborhood like that, because studies have shown that on a long block that's uninterrupted, you get as much as 10 to 15% more parking if you don't mark each spot. So you do get a little more parking that way, but you might want to just designate those curb cuts. As things move forward, it is important, as I said, to do the space counts. That helps you know when things change enough that you do need to change policy, and occasionally over time, that's what happens. If there's more public safety concerns, if there's a feeling that we can't get our emergency vehicles down the streets when we need to, if patrons are no longer able to access, if the spots on College and 23rd are always full, if your citations spike, that can be an indication that you've got a problem up there. And then just if your occupancy levels rise above 90 or 95%. And one of the topics that got brought up a lot as a possible solution was a residential permit program where the landowners, the property owners would have permits to park on the street, but it wouldn't be open to the public. And we consider that. We had a pretty good internal discussion on that with our parking operations group. And it's a good policy, and it works, and it accomplishes what it's supposed to do in most cities where it's enacted. I don't think you're quite there yet, but that might be your next step if it does get busier, is to put that in certain places. Some of the issues with it is it does increase that complexity of your parking operations. Someone's got to process all those permits, and with students and the turnover of that's a pretty healthy job, because someone doesn't buy one and keep it for 10 years. It changes every single year, and it may change every semester, so there's a lot there. It does limit your visitor parking. It brings up questions of who has rights to the public right-of-way in the area. And then there's just the price and cost of the whole thing is trying not to put too much cost of parking for people on the hill. And so at this time, I'm not recommending that. But again, it's a matter of keeping an eye on that data and make sure you're going forward. Like I said, I think there's awesome opportunities for synergy with the downtown parking plan. Again, not in specifics, not in rates and time limits, but in application and administration. And having a single entity for both locations help you make plans and accomplish things. Some of the things that were in the downtown study that I think are carried over very well to the College Hill area are branding of the parking system and marketing and communications plan. If you get the parking committee and the advisory board going, there should be a College Hill subcommittee on that. The streetscape issues, all your technology you have going in will be a great advantage in both areas. So, quick summary: convert Lot G to paid parking, improve the condition of the areas, collaborate with UNI to really not overbuild parking in the area, and enforce in a way that helps people stay honest. Because most of us want to be honest, we just have rough days sometimes. So.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. I did have one question I'll open up for council as well. With that sort of setting in university, the College Hill, those sorts of things, you mentioned having flexibility depending upon the needs or what happens on the Hill. What's been your experience in terms of enrollment? If it drops or if it goes up, if it fluctuates within a year or two or three, does it normally take longer to be able to change some things as enrollment fluctuates, or is it maybe every other year something might change?
So that's one of the advantages of having a close working relationship with UNI. You can maybe anticipate those things a little bit quicker. According to them, they're not anticipating any big enrollment changes. The downside, if it drops, that's kind of bad for the whole community, and your parking situation probably only gets easier to manage at that point. But if they do see a spike in enrollment and they see some steady increases coming, and they can let you know even just 4 to 6 months in advance, then you can start getting plans rolling maybe before you have real problems, or at least have a plan in place for when that does happen. And it may take a year. A residential permit program probably would take you 6 months to get up and rolling.
Okay. Thank you.
Just from the overhead of getting everybody on board. like I said, issuing all those permits, I've done it. It's a pain, but it takes some time to organize.
Very good. I will open it for council questions. Mr. Burr?
On the strict 24-hour parking limit, does that apply in the N lot for permits also? Or
Yep.
just the G and J?
Just the hourly,
And
mostly G.
mostly
yeah.
G. And you mentioned that it would be accomplished by the machines. What does that do after 24 hours? It just starts charging them?
Well, if you leave your car there overnight and you don't come get it in the morning, yeah, it's going to start charging them. Now, we joked about this at the public open house. Yes, you could wake up at 8:55 and get on your phone and buy 2 more hours of parking, but it's going to cost you to stay there. You're either going to get tickets, or you're going to have to pay every day to stay there. And the cost of that, it should be priced in a way that's not a realistic solution for somebody. That it's far cheap. I think an annual permit for the university is $86, and that's for both semesters. And so if you're paying $3-4 a day to park there, I guess it could happen a little bit, but I wouldn't anticipate that being a regular occurrence. That's the goal of charging, is to get those people onto the UNI lots.
Anything further from council? Mr. Cruz?
Thank you, John, for that presentation. It's really interesting. Looking at these occupancy parking maps starting morning, noon, and evening, I see some of these areas, if you really zoom in, you've got up to 125% parking labeled, and you really can't see it. You really got to zoom it in
Yeah.
with the proper tablet. And you said 80% is the comfort zone? Above 80, 85 starts to be problematic, I guess?
Above 85% is when people can have trouble finding those last few spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my concern as we go forward is, as we develop, the developer builds this multi-use development on College Street, the 5-story building. You did a parking impact study for us, and it shows 26 parking spots needed for the commercial space, which will have to be absorbed into one of these parking lots here.
Correct.
And Lot G is already filled to capacity pretty much all the time here. I think it shows 95% or more. As there's more density around the C3 zone, you're going to push a wave of people out into College, Olive, Walnut, Iowa, which is the overlay area. And I do know for a fact that there's a couple hundred unused bedrooms within this area that could be utilized. And this is outside the scope of your study, potentially with the occupancy of the area of the buildings, but how do you propose monitoring this without you doing the study again? Or do you have Google Earth and just count cars, or how do you come up with these numbers typically?
Okay, so the way we counted the cars was using the GIS collector application. So it enters into a GIS database, and then you have these maps came out of that GIS database. We're giving you that. I was just talking to Corey. We're going to give you that, and then enforcement staff, simply by calling something up on an application up on their phone, can enter that data. And so the ongoing monitoring of occupancy levels should be able to be done fairly easily by staff on a regular basis. Hey, today you're counting Lot G. Hey, today you're counting 23rd Street. And just they can go in and put those numbers, and then Corey will have all the data in the back end that you can really have pretty good, over time, data information about where you stand. And that really is the key to, I think, managing well, because if those 100 or more bedrooms did get filled in the area, you might have to do something a little different.
Sure. I did notice that Campus and Myrner Streets are continuously red. I sense that possibly the residents are filling those continuously as opposed to commuters, I'm guessing, but you don't really know necessarily.
We don't really know.
I mean, I have a hunch based on what I know is built there, but
It's not really it's not in a commercial, I mean, it's just far enough away from the commercial. Those aren't people going to those shops and stores, I
Sure.
can tell you that. And they were there all day long.
it was red all through your
Yep.
thing here.
They're not required to move, I don't think,
Right.
ever.
I remember the snowplow situation, so you're right, ever, they didn't move. But as long as we have the software that we can monitor this, I like that, because the commuters, well, let me back up. I think the first presentation that you came back with the results, you stated that on campus there's plentiful parking, seemingly. in the
That's what I've been told by you and I, yes.
Okay, and it's underutilized because it's beyond the range of the easy walk.
Yeah, the other side of,
And you had I think it was page 12, where you had the yellow area on the overhead there, showed what was the easy walk to campus within a block of 2 or 3. And this is where I touched upon the resident-only parking, where you've said no parking is free, in essence, even though it is free seemingly, that the resident-only parking could help switch over some of those commuters into the campus lots, and that's why they're in town. That's why they drove to that area to go to school, and that we could then utilize more of the occupancy and satisfy the community to have more students living next to campus, which is, again, beyond what you were enlisted to do. But that was a comment I wanted to present, that as you look at this data, it's pretty convincing to me that we should look closer at resident-only parking.
Very good. Mr. Blanford.
Yeah, thanks, John. Just one quick item. During the first public meeting, we talked about there was a question raised about the UNI parking ramp on 23rd Street and public use of that ramp. Could you just touch on that very briefly?
so you can pay hourly by the day, anybody can, to park in that facility. You have to have a permit, and I believe it's staff-only permit to park in there every day. And so the general public can't get a permit to park in there every day. But anybody can park anytime as long as they're willing to pay the meters at the bottom of the stairwells. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
You had mentioned permit rates for UNI. I thought you said $86.
they have 8 or 10 different permits, and they vary in price. But 86, I think, is the B permit.
Sure.
Which is the one most students have.
What I'm wondering about is our rates for the city. I've heard several criticisms anyway that our permit rates don't help the process along as far as paid parking or trying to change behavior, I guess, if you will. Any recommendations in regards to that?
Well, so rates are, I mean, they bring in money, but really their biggest goal of charging for parking is to control behavior.
Sure.
And you give people choices as opposed to tickets.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're over full, you raise your, 100 years now, the rule in parking is, if I'm full, I raise my rates. And so generally you would do that. You would use rates that are higher and would push people, you try to reach that next price point where people would move to a different option. It gets a little tricky in a small neighborhood like this, is you raise your rates too much and all of a sudden they're 2 blocks away in front of homes that maybe aren't as much student housing and stuff like that. So there are some concerns there, but that's exactly what rates are for. And they should be set up in a way to move people, and they have to be monitored, and sometimes they have to be adjusted, sometimes they have to be adjusted down.
Sure.
You know, you empty out a parking lot and no one parks there because there's rates in it, well, maybe the price needs to go down a little bit.
Sure.
So.
I had one more question for staff, if we can. Maintaining parking counts for downtown, have we set that process along at all?
I'm not sure where
With
we are
a
with that yet.
specific parking person to do that, or?
Sure. Actually, Mark, one of the things that we've talked about in our committee, as you know, I think we have a tech committee going with Community Main Street. And one of the things we've talked about is we're kind of focusing on getting all the implementation goals in, and then we know that that is something we're going to have to continue to do. And so as we're hiring the 2 new parking attendants, actually, we're going to have 2 starting here. Jackie and I have talked about, we know that will be part of our job, is to keep those parking counts up. So,
Thank you.
Mayor, if you don't mind me adding too, I know there's been conversations about UNI. I just wanted to let you know that we are planning on starting a tech committee with the College Hill group, the same as we've done with the Community Main Street group. We were just kind of waiting for this process, like to have the presentation tonight and move ahead. And so we've already been in contact with the UNI folks about starting that committee up. We've talked to Catherine and Michael Hager, and so I just wanted to let council know about that as well.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anything further from council? As I understand it, we will be moving forward as we are with downtown in terms of council voting as we move forward with these recommendations. Is that right? So there'll be more discussion as things might be formalized to vote on moving forward?
Right, I think tonight it might be great just to have a, motion to adopt, the report, but you're right, if the ordinance, like in terms of time limits and all that, will have to come in terms of an ordinance and all that too.
Okay, sure. And I guess, and I'm fine formalizing it, but this is the process, the beginning process for potential policy. So I'm happy to open up the committee meeting for anybody in the public that wants to come comment for 5 minutes. Or less. Don't hear or see any, then I'd like to have a motion for approval of the recommendations.
So moved.
Second.
Motion, second. Any further discussion from council? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for your time. Very enjoyable time. You have a great city, so
Thank
thanks
you.
for having me here.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item is Information Systems Update with our Information Systems Manager, Julie Sorensen. Link is up.
Hi. I'd like to take this opportunity tonight to talk about our new mobile app that we have for the city. So it's called Cedar Falls on the Go.
Use that microphone. Just,
Sorry.
okay.
It's called Cedar Falls on the Go. And we started work on this mobile app about last year. We actually worked with a CAP student from Cedar Falls who did a research project for us to look at what other people or what other municipalities have as functionality in their mobile app. He also took it a step further. He did a survey for what other, excuse me, might I get this on? What other citizens would like on the mobile app, or what citizens would like on the mobile app. And they also did a survey with a few of the city employees to see what functionality they'd also like on a mobile app. So we took the research, and then we did a little more looking at what other companies offered for maybe a content management for a mobile app. And we really felt that the option being offered by our existing website content management system had most of the functionality we wanted or was being offered in other municipalities also. So we went ahead, chose the vendor, brought together a team, looked again at what we needed to put at our fingertips or at our citizens' fingertips in this mobile app. So we also looked at analytics too. So now we have it ready. It's been published out into the app stores. It was like I said, late June, early July. And we believe that what we have offered gives the communication to our citizens another level as push notifications to the phones, but another level of communication to their citizens. You can get the mobile app one of three ways. On our homepage, there's a picture of it. You click on it, it gives you the download instructions. From I Want To, you can click on Download Mobile App, and it'll give you instructions. Or you can also go to www.cedarfalls.com, Cedar Falls on the Go, and it will give you the instructions. The instructions are laid out for both mobile, or both Apple and Android. There are two different sets of instructions, unfortunately. Apple has different rules on what they allow for, I would say, a template programming. So there's two different instructions depending on what you have. So now I'd just like to kind of go through some of the highlights that we did and added to this. One of the first things is the Notify Me. It looks like a little envelope. This gives you different categories that maybe we can notify our citizens with. And the different categories are like bid posting, calendar, government jobs or job openings, city news or news flash is what it's called. And one of the things we added just specifically for this was a new calendar, which is a garbage day calendar. So we will be able to notify you when your next garbage day is. It actually is the evening before the garbage day. The nice thing about this calendar is we keep track for you when your next pickup date is. So let's say we already know Thanksgiving is November 28th, and we know the pickup day is actually going to be Tuesday, the 26th. So we've already changed the calendar in here to notify you Monday evening, hey, your garbage day's tomorrow, you need to put it out. There's 3 options to be notified. It's email, text, or a push notification right to your phone. So it's the same way for all of these notifications for your calendars. There's lots of different categories to be notified on as far as road constructions and things like that too, and that be in the notify me option. So there's lots of different categories there. City, whether we have the agenda ready for the city council meeting or things like that. And you have, not all of them have text and email. Some of them have email and push, but either way, you have the notifications. Other things that we did is we created an Our City News, which is the little, it looks like a radio antenna. It's the 3rd row down. And that basically just gives us any information that we're sending out, press releases and things like that, and you'd be able to have it there at your fingertip. One thing that's added to this is a service request for city staff. So if you're out and about and you have a service request, you can actually take a picture of it. So you can open it up and take a photo. And then once you take the photo, it will put it into the app. You can fill out the information, and then if there's a broken pothole or broken sign or something like that, you can take the picture of it. It knows it. You can say, use my current location, fill out an email and your name, and you don't have to fill out the actual. If you want to remain anonymously, you don't have to fill out a real email. You can put like me@gmail.com or something like that if you need to, but it does require that information. And then it submits the service request for you. So that way we'll be able to see what you guys are talking about or what the citizens are filling it out. The other options, let's see here, are kind of seasonal from the analytics. Let me get back. Technology is wonderful, huh? Sorry. We'll just go back home. And this is what it looks like, I guess, when you start the mobile app, is the red Civic Mobile. Other options that we had were aquatics right now. 3 of the top 10 websites on the website were about swimming. So we have the aquatics, it's up there at the top. It gives you basic information for aquatics. This is something that's seasonal. We'll probably take it down in a month and put something, flood information, something more seasonal or something that's not quite ready. The other thing that's really important, we already talked about the calendar, but the public works refuse, we put it right at the fingertips, as this seems to be one of the more popular items on the website. So here you have refuse, yard waste, recycling, all of that at your fingertips. And when you're done, you just press done and go on. You can pay your parking tickets right here. There's information on rec and everything. We just thought it was probably the best information or what we needed right at our fingertips. So we put it together. It's available in both app stores. Future enhancements might be something like alert notifications. We're looking at a better way to alert. So we're looking at that and adding that in this act, maybe the blank spot. It might take up the seasonal spot. And we'd also like to be able to do pay for parking. If we get a browser to be able to pay for parking, we would add that here too. So instead of downloading another mobile app, if we could get it browser-based, we have to select our vendor yet, but maybe we can pull that browser right there at your fingertips too. So, and that's basically a 10,000 level look at the mobile app.
Was there a comparison with the other communities you saw or heard from? Are we expecting 300 folks to utilize this, or 30,000? Or is it just a matter of maybe Amanda getting the word out and other word of mouth to raise those numbers?
It is. It's just the way of get the word out. We really don't. And to tell you the truth, because we're working with that content, and it's a template for Apple, it's hard to know how many are downloading, because every city that uses Civic Plus, it counts as one download because it's the same app.
Sure.
You have to enter that Cedar Falls, so.
Sure. Anything else, council? Mr. Green?
No, thank you, Julie. I'm just curious, for the information that it's pulling into the mobile app, does that have to be manually entered in every time, or is it pulling data from the live website?
It actually uses the skeleton from the website, so it's kind of nice we'd be able to do that. Now, we do have links on here that are outside of our website, like the calendars on here. We have a Cedar Valley events calendar, and then we have the city calendar. The city calendar has their categories, once again, like we had, for the boards and commissions, and then the main city calendar, it also has our garbage days, but the main city calendar then is all the public meetings. But there's also the Cedar Valley events calendar, which that goes to the visitors website, and it gives you a listing of anything that's going on during today, or this weekend, or whenever you want. So it's a different website.
Okay, and do you have to have an internet connection to use it, or is the information just being downloaded and you can access offline?
You would have to have cell data or internet connection in order to get to that internet, yes.
Thanks.
Mr. Cruz?
On this, I'm assuming you either link in a checking account and/or credit card for bill paying and purchases and what
Well, the
have
two
you?
things that we would have, yes, we would do pay your parking tickets, and then also for the paying for parking, and once we get there. So that would be maintained by the vendors that we choose through the parking study.
So the encryption would be on them. to-
Exactly.
Not us to worry
Yep.
about. And liability on them.
Exactly.
Daryl, you're right. We've already talked about that in terms of PCI compliance. We'd have to ensure that our vendor has the PCI compliance with any credit card information.
Anything further from council?
Mr. Mayor, just asking if we could request an update maybe in 6 months to see how the app is working and if there's changes that are needed.
Sure, absolutely. I'll make note of that. Thank you, Julie. That was the best high-tech presentation we've had
Thanks.
in a long time.
Oh, wait.
Oh, wait, Corey. Corey might outdo you. Hang on a second.
Evening. In addition to all that, we just wanted to kind of point out a few newer applications that we have from a mapping standpoint. I know we already have kind of a general one where you can go look up some information, but we've also been working on a few other ones that, well, really quite honestly, we just kind of want to get the word out more about it. So, because we think they've got some valuable information and stuff that can help staff either avoid having, phone calls or walk-ins or, other stuff. Just information that we're going to put out there so that if they need to, they can go get it out there. So I got 3 of them for you, and then you guys can ask all the questions you want. The first one, we kind of recreated. We had an old map on here that it was a little bit outdated, so we wanted to update the park and rec information, trails, and some other stuff. But we wanted to be able to link in so that, if somebody wanted to go to Gateway Park and they wanted to be able to go check out the amenities on it, or reserve I know they can reserve the shelters and stuff. I know right now they can call, but that's going to be online at some point, I know, I've heard. But we'd also want to put that out there too, so it'd almost be kind of a one-click. So if they want to go and they're on their phone or whatever, and they can geolocate. It won't do anything right here because we're on Wi-Fi, but we'd want to add kind of that information that bumps them over, and they can just a way to get to it quicker. They can check out the information in the park. So this is just obviously going to the website that the recreation staff maintains, but we're trying to kind of keep adding more and more information so that it's less and less that they have to go search around for it. One of the other things that came up when I was discussing it with public works staff is there's there's probably more than this, but so far I found 246 memorial benches around our trails, our parks, or whatever. And you guys know this. A lot of them have a dedicated memorial to. We'd like to get that to something that's actually searchable, so that they can come up and they can, like for example, this bench right here. We know it's. I went through and did Overman Park real quick because it was just an easy way to do it, but. That's something that we could send, even like a summertime staff out with a mobile application, and they can go start just, doing an inventory on this, and, if we want to add a picture to it or something, we can do that too, which is kind of nice. But I guess kind of maybe being able to have searchable, I don't know, it's, maybe you've got a relative that's got a plaque or something somewhere, and you just want to be able to find it. So something I noticed in Overman Park too that we'd like to add now is, you don't realize it, but there's at least 4 rocks that I found out there that also have a plaque on them. So, just keep adding it to the list, right? The second one, so we had a discussion with some of the staff that work on the cemetery information, and a lot of the information was still in paper form, or it was in an older system, and they had a group of CAP students that came together and were really good. They're super good with technology, so they kind of help them do a lot of the migration to it. But one of the things that they get a lot of requests for is people looking for a relative, or just people that are really into genealogy and they just want to go search for stuff. Well, obviously that takes time from them, because the problem was, I know my relative is buried somewhere in Cedar Falls, but I don't know where. Well, they still had to search one cemetery at a time to try to figure it out. So obviously the whole goal was, well, how about we try to get this all aggregated together so that all you have to do is just, perform one quick search. And I'm not necessarily picking on you, Mary, but, you got a really common name, so. So we, it's pretty, you could put in more information if you wanted to, but the idea was, obviously if they had something that they could point the public to, or they could just do it real quick themselves, but they could go through and find all the information that we currently store, and a lot of them actually have a lot more information on it. Some of them have like the whole actual obituary, which is, I don't know. I'm kind of in history and stuff too, so I think it's pretty cool. But I know they're starting to scan a few of those too, so we'd want to kind of maybe try to figure out how to work those in. But at least then you could kind of say you can find where those people are actually, if that's who you're looking for or whatever. So. I don't know what else I was going to say about that, but.
So the CAPS kids did all this?
They did a lot of the information where, one of the gaps that they had was, some spaces are purchased, some of them reserved, for a period of, I can't remember how long, and then some of them are just, they can't quite build on them yet, because you'll kind of notice, like maybe, or actually a good example here in like Block 9 on Fairview, there's some that just aren't accessible yet by, there's no road there. So they had to go through and kind of help with that. And then the other thing that was, that they helped with was, when the data got imported, say there was like 5 cremations on one spot, they were just kind of all stacked together. So they were, you couldn't actually A, read them, or B, know where they were actually at. And that was very important to the staff that, we wanted to recreate those historical maps as accurately as possible. So they worked with, the CAP students to kind of adjust all that stuff. So, I'd kind of check and see how they would do every week, and it was obviously it's pretty amazing how much they actually got done every week, which I thought it was a pretty good project. So, so the other one that we kind of did was we wanted to put together just kind of a high overview. We didn't include everything on current building permits. We kind of tried to keep it to like new buildings, additions, remodels. We threw in demolitions, though we don't have tons of those out there, and they're usually done and over with. But just to kind of get you again like a 10,000-foot view of we wanted to use these graduated symbols so that you could kind of get an indication like, well, where's kind of the high areas of development, which we kind of know that most of it's happening on the south end of town, but sometimes. Somebody didn't know all the information about a permit, and they were calling in. They just knew like kind of the general location, but we wanted to be able to give them that access so that if they had a permit and they knew about it, they could go check it out, and if they wanted to, CF One Stop, which is the actual permitting system that we're using in, along with Llama, they could bump over and actually get, all the details about it. They can get all the documents that are uploaded, all the information. They could even go and look at, all the different, the inspections that have happened where they passed or failed or whatever. So really, like I said, a lot of this is just trying to get more information out there, in the interest of transparency and ease and just staff time. So I didn't have a whole lot else, but if you guys have any questions?
Yeah,
or,
great work, Corey. Any
Yeah.
questions for Corey?
I did have one thing that I was just, you don't have to tell me now, but just if there's stuff that you get asked for as a council member or mayor or anybody, just, I just kind of like to know, because if it's something that we can put together that makes it easier, then, all for it, so.
Perfect. Mr. Miller, did you have?
Stormwater permits, are those included in that by chance?
They aren't, but we could.
We hear from citizens quite often about
Yeah.
stormwater stuff, so,
Mhm.
that's something they can punch up on their phone and see if there's a stormwater permit for something, and something similar along the lines of snapping a photo, and that may be something good.
That's good. Anything further, Mr. Green?
Mr. Mayor, seeing that some of these items, like the cemetery database, that's something that general public could definitely be interested in for genealogy, things like that. Has there been discussions with the Cedar Falls Public Library at all about maybe training them on the use of it to get it out of the city staff's hands for the general questions, since it's kind of like a reference question?
Not me personally, no, we haven't had any discussion about that, but so definitely something I can talk to Jennifer about, and, yeah.
Anything further from council? Thank you very much.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Corey.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next item is the on-street parking of trailers. City Attorney Kevin Rogers is making his way.
Good evening, Mayor, Council.
Good evening.
Talking about technology, you guys see what happened right there?
Yeah.
He made sure that I really couldn't mess this up from the beginning, so I appreciate that.
It's Kevin proof.
Almost, we'll see. Council might recall about 16 months ago, it took up the matter of large trucks and trailers on the streets in committee, and council at that time decided that they did not want to pursue changes at that time. There was a referral made recently to have another look, so we're going to have another look tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what the ordinances cover right now. We're going to talk about what they allow and don't allow. We're going to talk about maybe some issues with our current ordinances, and then we're going to talk about potential solutions. So, being an attorney, I have to give a caveat right off the bat. What we're not going to talk about tonight are more general restrictions on parking, such as certain streets you can't park on certain days or hours, and general regulation about fire hydrants, parking in fire lanes or near intersections, regulations of general applicability to all vehicles all over the city. So we're just going to, that's a given. So we don't need to address that when we're talking about large trucks and trailers on streets and parking lots. So here's what the current ordinances tell us, and I thought it might be helpful to you to know what we do regulate, and then maybe where we can improve regulation a little bit. It says right now that vehicles in the street that amount to an obstruction, and I didn't know this until I looked this up, require a banner, and if it's left overnight, requires a flashing amber light all night long. That's one area we regulate. Also, vehicles may never be left standing on or across any street so as to unreasonably obstruct the street. You might wonder, what does unreasonably obstruct the street means? And I think it tells us here that you can't park a vehicle so as to leave available less than 10 feet of width of the roadway for, obviously, vehicles to get around the obstruction. So we have general regulation about things like that. We also have, I call this the washing and greasing ordinance. You can't park on the street to do that kind of thing. I can't say, I've never seen that happen before, but it's in the Code of Ordinances. And here's the big one. I think we all know this. We refer to it a lot. It's, and this is all motor vehicles, that they can't be parked for a continuous period of more than 48 hours on the city streets. And here's the ordinance that we're going to be talking about quite a bit more, and that's the general ordinance that talks about trucks of a gross capacity of 1 ton or more can't park on the street or in municipal lots at all. That's the way the ordinance reads right now, at all. It doesn't say certain hours or anything like that. It's just they can't park there. And there are certain restrictions on activities on the streets too, such as loading and unloading. We call out certain streets where you're not able to load or unload freight, and that's what you'd expect in busy areas around Main Street and College Street. And there's certain hours for that, and it calls people over to use the alleyways if feasible. And by the way, if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to stop me. And then, contrary-wise, we do allow parking and other activities for certain activities, and that is to load and unload goods at certain times on certain streets, and it calls out literally the streets where we do allow loading and unloading of goods. So though that particular aspect is covered for those streets, but if we look at the ordinance that I talked about before that says no parking of large trucks, so unless you're in those specific areas of the city to unload, literally, if you enforce these, it would say no loading and unloading otherwise outside of these particular areas. So that might be an opportunity for improvement. This is something I wasn't completely familiar with either before I looked it up. So if you're involved in construction, you can use a third of the street adjacent to the building to store your materials, and I would think that'd be shingles and other materials, as long as you have a permit to do so. And it says for a reasonable length of time. I would assume reasonable means during the construction project. And we see that once in a while on the streets. Folks will keep their stuff there when they're doing construction work near a building. However, I would say that that doesn't include the vehicles involved in the activity. That's just the materials. It says depositing building materials, so that's not a parking ordinance. And you might ask yourself, if they're outside those areas where we specifically allowed loading and unloading, how do they unload the building materials if they can't park there? Another opportunity for improvement, perhaps. So that's what we do regulate currently and what we allow and don't allow. So the issues that we may want to take a look at this evening is that these large vehicles may not park on the streets except in those specific areas that we talked about for loading and unloading, and then only to load and unload, not to park. So it's very limited in that fashion. And the Code of Ordinances section I'm referring to has some problems with it, and I'll explain what those problems are. Here's the entirety of the ordinance. Except as otherwise provided, trucks of a gross capacity of 1 ton or more shall not park upon the streets or municipal parking lots of the city. There are some issues such as vagueness. Truck isn't defined anywhere in the Code of Ordinances, so we're not sure what a truck means exactly. And gross capacity of 1 ton or more, it's not defined in the ordinance either, so we don't know if that's the license weight. Is that hauling capacity, towing capacity? Well, we're not sure about that. The ordinance as currently written also has some issues with the breadth of the ordinance. In my judgment, it's under-inclusive because it shouldn't be limited to trucks. If you're going to have a regulation on parking big vehicles in the street, I don't think it should be limited to trucks. There are lots of other vehicles that are propelled down the street that maybe you want to take a look at regulating other than just trucks, such as vans, buses, ag equipment, semi-tractor trailer, things like that. And over-inclusive is a problem too with this ordinance in that you you can't park at all, it says. There's no exceptions, so no parking on the streets at all with these large trucks or in municipal lots. So it's both under and over inclusive, which is quite a feat for an ordinance. When we looked at potential solutions, I did look at other cities, and there are, as you might expect, there are a variety of approaches to these large trucks parked on various city streets. But they follow kind of a general pattern for regulation, and they kind of attack the problem in three ways. They describe the vehicle, or they have a time limit or a complete ban, and exceptions. And that's kind of the general way that this area is regulated by other cities. And that's what we'll be proposing tonight. When it comes to description of vehicle, that's attacked in a lot of different ways, but a lot of cities use a laundry list, which we'll get to in a minute. Some say just commercial vehicles, but unless they define that term, that can be problematic. What's a commercial vehicle? Some of them get down to dimensions, and they vary widely with length, sometimes weight. The problem with getting down to size descriptions is you'll have parking enforcement personnel out there with tape measures, and I don't know if that's the right approach. And then, of course, weight descriptions. You'll recall that I was talking about a 1-ton weight limit, whatever that means, in Cedar Falls, and they've got different weights, different cities attack it differently.
Kevin?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. We had a discussion a few months ago about we had to change how we're marking vehicles, where we can't mark tires anymore. We have to mark pavement. How do the cities that use these, with that prohibition about contact with the vehicle, how does that work?
I think that one, it's an interesting case, but it's slow to catch on. Fortunately for the city of Cedar Falls, we've got technology coming along that's going to alleviate that, but it's an issue. And you get to a bigger issue, I think, and that is when you get into distances. How do you regulate that? How do you determine if that vehicle moved over there and for how long? How do you determine that? So that was a good question. Let's see. And we thought this was Kevin proof. Okay. So we covered the weight, and then those are some of the issues. So I'm going to back it up again. So of description of vehicle, those are the approaches. And the recommendation is a laundry list of the types of vehicles that would be subject to regulation. So no weights, no dimensions, nothing like that. But the laundry list would include all of the vehicles described in Chapter 321 of the Iowa Code, because there's built-in definitions in Chapter 321. And so we can borrow the definitions that are already there and use those in Cedar Falls Code of Ordinances by a laundry list of the vehicles that would be prohibited. Back to what other cities do on time limit, they vary from an outright ban or a ban in certain areas, such as commercial districts, to a certain amount of time that such large vehicles are allowed to be parked on the streets. And those vary from a couple hours to up to 4 hours. Recommendation here is the time limits, just like distance I talked about with council, with a previous question from Councilmember Blandford, is time limits are tricky too, because you've got to keep track of when the car or the large vehicle was parked, and then when it came back. You'd have to circle back around and determine how long it was there, if it's 48 hours or less than 48 hours, or 47 hours and 55 minutes, for instance. And so that gets to be sort of an administrative burden when you're trying to enforce this. And so the recommendation would be to impose just a ban or certain hours that then the code of the parking enforcement personnel, if it's banned for certain hours, a drive-by would pick it up if it's outside those hours. The other way, remember, we had three ways that cities address regulation of large trucks, and the other is exceptions, and there always needs to be exceptions for legitimate purposes that folks have these large vehicles at businesses or at residence. And generally, they follow pickup, delivery, or loading and unloading of materials are always accepted, obviously. And so that would be something that we would recommend carry forward to accept certain activities from a ban. So here's the proposed language. I'm not going to read all of this because it's a lot, but most of these terms are already defined in Chapter 321, as I indicated earlier. The only couple terms, of course, boat isn't defined. We all know what a boat is, I think. Manufacturer, mobile home, construction equipment. Those are more general terms that were added. Otherwise, I think each and every one of these terms are defined in Chapter 321 of the Iowa Code. And so we're borrowing from the code to get our laundry list together. You'll see the advantage here is no dimensions, no weights, nothing like that. It's what these vehicles are defined as in the Iowa Code. And so you get past that, and then we add trailer then to this laundry list of vehicles. And the trailers that would be banned would be capable of transporting any of the above or transporting a motor vehicle, so we pick up the car carriers. And so there's the regulation part, and then the exception would be that the ordinance would not apply to persons actively loading or unloading, or to persons actively engaged in providing authorized services or conducting authorized activities nearby, basically. Of course, assuming they're otherwise parked legally. So that is sort of the recommended change in the ordinance. We left the 48-hour in place. This would be to modify the other Code of Ordinance section that I thought was, remember, we had breadth problems, we had vagueness problems. And so that would be the proposed language. I can stop here and answer any questions about the specific language.
Mr. Blanford.
Mr. Rogers, I'm just curious about, when you were listing in the exceptions, what about folks who, let's say they're going on a family camping trip that weekend, and so they bring the trailer on Friday during the day, and are going to leave it Friday night as they clean it out, load it up, and then head out Saturday morning. If we remove that from the 48-hour section, they would not be able to do that at all. Is that correct?
I would argue that's probably authorized activities upon the adjacent premises, but it gets a little bit difficult to draw that line because, well, they could argue that I'm going on vacation in 3 weeks and so on. It's part of that. So,
do we need to better define that then?
It depends upon how far down you want to get into things like that. So where do you start and stop? Is it snowmobiles? Is it motorcycles? Is it your camper, travel trailer? So we could define that better. But quite honestly, if it's somebody getting ready for the weekend, I don't know that we're going to get a lot of complaints, which quite honestly, this is how this parking ordinance is generally enforced, is complaint-based. If you're just load up the night before, for the weekend, I don't think it's going to be a big issue.
I just want to make sure we're not creating an additional problem.
Yes, and we could add an exception for those, but we'd have to be careful about what we accepted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Whelan?
I'd like to add to Council Blanford's comments. I've had the same complaint from a number of people, that they want to be able to load their recreational stuff and go the next day. And I think it'd be a perfectly acceptable exception versus having someone park their trailer out there 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because they can beat our current system. So I'd be in favor of that exception if, and I think that could be written to as long as your trailer's hooked up to your car and you're going, or it could just be as long as you're loading, unloading, and leaving the next day. But I think there's some wording that we could put in that would make that work. And then my other question is, did I hear you say something about we're going to leave the 48-hour limit?
Yes,
Does it apply to commercial trailers in neighborhoods that are parked there 7 days a week?
this would ban them.
Okay.
So for all other vehicles, other than the laundry list, 48 hours, these, with this language, are banned.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Green?
So, Mr. Rogers, with that laundry list that we created, is that really meant to limit out everything except for personal passenger vehicles?
And pickups.
Okay, pickups. And then with only in the residential zone, or how it was, some other cities do it where it only applies to residential zone, I'd be in favor of that, of changing that so that if somebody's got a trailer or commercial vehicle in, say, an industrial area, commercial area, I don't think that's what this is meant to address. I feel like our issues are just in the residential area. So I'd be amenable to amending that.
And this would apply citywide, not just restricted, so we'd have to adjust the language a little bit to apply only residential zones.
Kevin, would it be your preference to formalize this evening, or if council decides to move it forward to a council meeting and then moving it forward, then to amend?
Here's what my request would be on the ideas. If I get a consensus from council, that's what we'd be interested in taking a look at that. That would help me. It'd be easier to have kind of a consensus coming back than to amend an ordinance on the fly. So I think this is a good opportunity for some back and forth. And so, for instance, residential zone, if council by a majority think that's a good idea, I'll sure bring it back.
Sure.
With the ordinance.
Sure, that makes sense, Mr. Blanford.
Okay. And if you're going, if you got a recreational vehicle and you're loading and unloading, that can be built in as an exception.
Yes.
And I did notice other communities do that. They describe the vehicle, the time limit, and exceptions.
Yes.
The key is don't get into too many exceptions where you put numbers with it that are not enforceable.
Right. Yeah.
That's the way I take it.
Mr. Blanford?
Councilman Green, I was just curious, for the amendment, would you look to apply that to mixed-use zones as well that have residential tenants?
Yeah, I think that would probably make sense too, to have that, so that vehicles aren't in the mixed use. 'Cause I would think of that as being primarily like a residential friendly zone.
Okay.
So I'm thinking more of like manufacturing zones and commercial.
Okay.
So you could attack that one of two ways. You could call out the ones where it's not allowed, or call out the ones that are, where my planning friends could help me here, but it may be best, since this is a prohibition ordinance, to stick with where it's not allowed. And so that would go to your point, we'd say residential, mixed use, however we want to do that. And we call out the zoning sections of the city where it would not be allowed.
Okay. Thank you.
I think I said that right.
I think so. Mr. Miller?
Can we put the verbiage back up there of what the proposed
Sure.
ordinance is? So down at the bottom there, conducting authorized activities for or upon adjacent or nearby premises. Somebody using a trailer to store things that go on the property or that are theirs, don't they have an argument here that that's an authorized activity? They're storing things. I mean, do you open up another can of worms here too?
Yeah, great question. The actively engaged in, I think, saves that. It's not storage, it's actively engaged in doing something on that nearby premises.
So,
If it's just if it's just sitting there as a parking space, that's not actively engaged in something associated with that nearby premises. That'd be the interpretation I'd give to the parking enforcement folks anyway.
Every word counts.
it does, yeah.
So then in regards to construction trailers or whatever, the 48-hour ordinance doesn't apply to those if actively engaged in a construction project in front of a property? Am I understanding that right?
So if it could possibly be longer than 48 hours, if you're parking there in front of a house like you're doing a remodel or something, it could be possibly longer than that, because I think this would have specific applicability.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Just like the folks that store stuff on the street, the shingles when they're doing remodeling, I mean, that could be longer than 48 hours.
Yep.
I've had a trailer out in front of my house for 2 weeks, and they're working on the house next door. Nobody complains.
Sure.
Mr. Boer, did you have a question?
Well, I've not heard complaints for this long laundry list of vehicles that you mentioned here. Instead, what I've heard is a complaint from, I think David mentioned a trailer, that after 48 hours, they're not moving. So was there any other recommendation, rather than having this long laundry list of vehicles to ban, a complete ban on? Is there any other way to improve the 48-hour to move the vehicles that weren't being moved?
There may be, and I think I know somebody who has a solution potentially, but here's my concern with that. As soon as you establish a distance, how is that to be enforced? We would have to monitor when it left, how long was parked at the new location, and then how long it came back to have any enforcement. And a parking enforcement personnel driving around town would have no idea how long that vehicle had been moved. So we get distance and time in there, it becomes difficult to enforce. That's why I've advocated a ban, so if it's there, they know it's wrong. But there are a lot of ways to skin this cat.
But we're doing a complete ban on all types of vehicles because of a couple problems? Is that what I'm understanding?
I'm not sure the policy reason. I just wanted to catch every type of big vehicle, so we didn't leave any out that would say, you didn't mention mine, so I get to park it there. I don't know the scope of the problem.
Anything further? Mr. Cruz?
Thanks, Kevin, for this. Yes, I do have a solution here that I passed out to everybody. And I thought about this, as we mentioned, what did you say, 18 months ago? The proposal to me is way too restrictive. It interferes with people's normal daily activities of business, recreation, and pleasure, and so on. Kevin, you had mentioned that for the most part, our city operates under a complaint system to monitor these things. Certainly the police department is not out there cruising 400-plus miles of our streets looking for a canoe trailer that sat there for more than 48 hours. So a lot of this will take care of itself as people use their recreational equipment and so on. So I had proposed, after 48 hours of elapsed continuous parking, a vehicle has to be removed from the location by more than 2,500 feet. In other words, just get it gone. And with the idea that they can't return within 48 hours. And of course, the person that will monitor this is not necessarily the public police department. It would be the public themselves who see a complaint. They're the best person with the best vantage to see that if there is a vehicle parked, as Dave, you say you had somebody there for 7 days a week, that's already over the 48-hour limit. Mr. Olson should have been notified that that vehicle's violating our item 17 in the code section, and it should have been taken care of. I see that it should never have happened. And then I know, talking with Mr. Olson about people play the game where they pull the trailer ahead a couple feet. I mean, I wrote in the fact here that an absence, let's see here, moving a vehicle a short distance doesn't terminate the 48 hours. An absence from the street location less than 2 hours doesn't reset the 48-hour clock, things like that. Because we're looking at a system in Cedar Falls where it's enforcement by complaint, supervision by complaint, monitoring 48 hours by public complaint. So this big laundry list here just seems difficult to enforce, educate the public. There'll be numerous people that won't know about it, park their boat, their RV, what have you, and if nobody in the neighborhood complains, just like our truck ordinance was never enforced, nobody knew about it. You know, I can have my Toyota Tacoma as a license as a 2-ton vehicle and be improper everywhere in the city. So to make it simple, I was proposing this language here, and I think that's the route to go, especially with monitoring by our own public for vehicles that violate the 48 hours.
Mr. Blanford?
Kevin, I do have a question for you in a second, but Councilman Cruz, how are we addressing Mr. Rogers' concern about the ongoing monitoring? I know you mentioned the public, but if you have somebody that that calls in and makes a complaint and the staff goes out, we can't mark the vehicle anymore. We can theoretically maybe mark the pavement. But
I don't know that
how
you-
we're continuously doing that.
I don't know that if it's 48, 52, 60 hours. I mean, we know that there's certain trailers, which seems to be the problem, that are historically and habitually the problem, that they stay there, they return there, they're always there. The police patrol the city all the time. If they know that there's a trailer in Cherrywood that is always there, they can, in their normal patrol, drive by and see, it's there again. It's there tomorrow. It's there the next day. Okay, we got a habitual offender that's not taking the subtle notice to say, hey, move, and get it off the street.
You have
It's
to
a
have some
simple
kind
way
of
to
track.
do this without restricting everybody and making a big list and saying, okay, is this person going to go jet skiing for the weekend and their vehicle's there on Wednesday? Are they leaving Thursday? Are they leaving Friday? When are they leaving for the trip? When do they come back? That sort of thing.
How are we tracking that between shifts and between different personnel? Are we
I
issuing
guess,
warning
Mr. Olson,
citations?
when you got situations that are chronic violators, how do you handle that when you go from one shift to another? Is it passed on to the next patrol for that part of town, I'm assuming?
Well, typically, these violations are 48-hour ordinance, so if I was to mark a vehicle on Monday, I would personally check back on the Wednesday. Or if that would happen to be my day off, then we have another officer on the same shift check that violation. It's typically how we would go. Now, we do run into the problem where people move their vehicle just a few feet, and then you mark the vehicle again, and you wait another 48, and they move it a few feet. So we do try to make covert efforts to mark where they're at, so if they're doing that just to defeat the ordinance, so we can get back and see if it's been moved or not, if it's legitimately, maybe they take it away during the day and park it in the same place every night. But we do, once we've established the fact that we think somebody's just skirting the ordinance, we try to do it in a more covert way in which we can take some enforcement action.
Well, now that we've got this GIS system,
Well, the information system that was just discussed 20 minutes ago, is there a way to use that mobile app to mark these vehicles that don't move? I mean, we mentioned take a picture of it, it goes in the app, then you'd have a clear reference where it was.
The problem with that, however, is they can move it in the interim, right? Couldn't they?
Well, it said it marks the date.
Yeah, but when you come back, you don't know if they've moved it between the times you've taken a picture of it.
Anything further from council? Let's move on. You
Okay.
can certainly circle back, Mr. Whelan.
We have a motion, we haven't had a second on it.
I heard no motion. Oh, with Mr. Cruz?
well,
You didn't make a motion?
during the committee like this to make a motion?
We need to formalize it, just as Attorney Rogers indicated earlier. He'll be all over the place.
Okay.
When we come
Well-
before council, then it'll,
I would like to make a motion as the language I passed out. I can read it all if you wish.
I think we're
I'll
okay.
second that.
It's been motioned, second. Any further discussion from council?
Mayor.
Mr. Cruz, Mr. Whelan, sorry.
Did you get a second on that?
We did, yes, sir. Any comments?
And I'd like to address that we already know the 48-hour limit is not enforceable. There are people who game the system throughout this town, both with boat trailers and with commercial trailers, and the people in the neighborhoods have started to use the term, we're tired of the character of our neighborhood being destroyed by having these vehicles there. The amendment not only wants to have the police department mark the tire for 48 hours, come back and do it again, that's after they get a complaint, but they got to have a tape measure and maintain 2,500 feet to make sure that vehicle's moved that far. It makes it even more unenforceable. What is proposed is not restrictive. It allows commercial vehicles that are being used in a residential neighborhood to sit there as long as it takes. It allows people who have recreational vehicles to load and unload, and like we said, stay overnight. It solves all the problems. So it's not a big, long, exclusive list. It's a list that people have put a lot of work in to define. And it solves the problem of people in residential neighborhoods who are sick and tired of having people outgame us on our ordinance. And this only makes it worse.
Thank you, Ms. Whelan. Any further comment?
Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Whether it's 2,500 feet or a city block, I don't know what that number should be, but I'm kind of intrigued by this. I mean, the moving a vehicle 2 feet and calling it good, it skirts the system, and this would be a way, I mean, if this is being monitored anyway, and to Councilwoman DeBurr's point, I don't know how often this is happening. I've never had a complaint about this prior to this coming up this time again, so if we're already monitoring it and say it needs to move 1 city block, then what's it going to hurt to come back? I mean, if an officer's got to come back and check it out anyway, then let's give it a shot and see. I'm not in favor of a total ban on this.
Mr. Cruz?
I just chose the 2,500 feet as something, a restraining order number, which, as I'm told, can be any distance, whether it's 1,000 feet, a couple houses. I'm trying to design something here that will annoy the person with the trailer that thinks they're getting away with something to eventually say to themselves, you know, I'm going to put it in my driveway, is what I'm after. And going back to the laundry list and all these things that are purported to fix by that, I still think there's so many people out there that won't understand it. There'll be violations all the time of that. This is very simplistic. I still don't believe that there is a commercial vehicle parked for 7 days a week, as Mr. Whelan had said. If there was, the police weren't informed to monitor it and ticket it, or boot it, or tow it, whatever they do. So whether we do 1,000 feet, I mean, it's just a number I chose for the purpose of getting this going. And I wanted to clarify when I said an absence from a street location of less than 2 hours, that would be one of the games they play. As Mr. Olson alluded to, they pull it around the block and repark it facing the other way. That's not really starting the 48-hour clock over, nor is moving it a couple feet, that sort of thing. So in general, that's my method of eliminating the games that people play.
Sounds good, sir. 2,500 is on the table. Mr. Blanford?
Mr. Rogers, I was just wondering if the language that's proposed here, that it just says park a vehicle, do you think vehicle is encompassing enough to address the concerns without delineating all of them?
Well,
That's what the code says right now.
as a point of clarification, the presumption here is council's okay with any kind of vehicle parking in one place for 48 hours. I mean, that's the presumption behind this.
Right.
Let's be clear about that. Second of all, if the approach is going to be kind of amending the 48-hour ordinance, then we haven't addressed the problems with the other ordinance. And so I would recommend, if you do go the 48-hour approach, that the other one that we talked about that's has breadth problems, has vagueness problems, you just eliminate it. And so all vehicles would be governed by the 48-hour rule. And again, it presumes that some semi-tractor trailers or farm tractors are okay for 48 hours at a time, just so everyone knows what this means. And that's policy. That's up to you.
And just to clarify, though, to you, does vehicle encompass anything with wheels or anything parked on a street?
I actually think vehicle is defined in 321, and it's extremely broad. I think that may even involve bicycles. So it's a very broad term.
Thank you.
So then what you're describing there, if someone lives on the street and their kids, they have a small driveway, and so the kids drive and there's 2 cars parked on the street in front of the house, normal like, there's only 48 hours based off of complaint?
Without moving.
Without moving it? Yeah.
Well,
That's the way the
there's
ordinance
now.
currently is.
There's homes without driveways.
Yep.
Not many, but there are.
Go ahead, Mr. Cruz.
Based on what, Kevin, you just said, I'd like to amend my amendment. How do you say that? Is that right? Add to the amendment?
Sure.
An elimination of section 23-372, which you referenced as the over and under inclusive. What is a truck? How do you define 1 ton, which isn't enforced now at all in the city, as you mentioned?
So it's been motioned to amend the original motion by Councilman Cruz to remove the whatever language that was.
Section 23-372.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been motion and second. Any further discussion on that amendment?
Can I ask a couple of questions? I know I
Yeah.
like it. Well, I agree with Darrell that seems to me it's a handful of chronic violators. So, number one, I'd like to focus on those people. Number two, how do we consequate this? What happens if they're parked for 48 hours? They get a fine,
Right.
and then if
It's a citation.
offenders, they get heavier fines?
Yes.
And people are still willing to pay these fines, or?
We hope not.
Seems to me if we enforce it by finding people, they'll eventually stop doing it.
That's the hope.
So keep it simple.
Could I ask?
Well, we have on the table the amendments. If it's toward the amendment, then
I
that's...
wanted to ask what the violation and the successive violation for Mr. Olson, if I could.
Sure,
If you
yeah.
want to clarify, how do you progressively annoy the person with the trailer to the point that they decide to not do it anymore?
Well, if they're in violation of 40-hour, we'll cite them.
With a $20 ticket, $10 ticket, what do you, or you can look it up?
It's up to
I'd have to
council.
look
Look it up, but it's
Okay.
somewhere in the range of $20, $25, I think.
Okay,
And then you would, if it would continue to stay there, well, we would always make a phone call as well and inform them what the law is, and if they move it, we've solved the problem. If not, we can continue to chalk and cite, or if it gets to a point where it is becoming a long-term problem, we can always tow a vehicle.
you can always tow.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Been motion, second to amend by removing the 23-272. Any further
Mr. Mayor?
comments? Yes, Mr. Whelan?
If I may. It's been said that we have habitual violators that are chronic problems, and it's not very pronounced in the city. There are people from Cherrywood, Ward 5 and Ward 4 that have contacted me since February 2018 when this was defeated, and they said, "Thank you for going after it. It's destroying the character of our neighborhood." We call the police, and they come out, and they mark it, and the person moves it, and the trailer's still there 2 days later. The trailer you're talking about, a commercial trailer's there 7 days a week. It gets moved every day except Saturday and Sunday. It's his personal private parking lot for his commercial vehicle. So there's 3 examples of chronic violators. Now, is 3 enough for you to think that people of the city have a problem? That same night we defeated this ordinance, we passed one that wouldn't allow a deer to be put out in front of one person's house. One complaint, and we passed it 7-0. So I don't understand your argument that it's just habitual criminals that are getting away with this. Why don't we go after them? The 48-hour doesn't work. The people that call me say it doesn't work. I know it doesn't work. I've pursued it for 2 years now. The police don't have time to catch them, and when they go after them and have to mark it, the habitual violators just move their vehicle. Now, in addition to that, the amendment wants to add a distance to add to that. So the police officer not only has to go out and move it, but he has to add a tape measure to it to make sure it's moved. It's just not working for habitual violators, and if one person we can create an ordinance for, we can certainly do it for 5 or 6 that are tired of having their neighborhood character destroyed by vehicles parked, both boats and commercial vehicles, in front of their houses. And they think the city can't do anything about it.
Thank you, Mr. Whelan.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
if I may. There's 41,000 people in the city, and 3, 4, 5, 7 people that are the chronic violators, I do not believe destroy, that's a strong word, the character of a neighborhood. There are ways that we can embolden the police department to enforce this. This is a way to avoid the people from moving just a few feet and that sort of thing. I think it's worth an effort before we ban everything in the city and go through a subjective method of saying that somebody's brought their boat out of storage. When are they going to go to the river? When are they going to come back from the river? That's even more subjective than the 48-hour rule. And as I said, the 2,500 feet can be adopted as just a way to get it away from the property a long distance and force the people to eventually park in their driveways.
Mr. Mayor, I'll respond to his comments.
It's fine. It's on the table just to the amend the 223-272. If we can kind of withhold any more, go ahead, Mr. Whalen. Go ahead, sorry.
372, though. 372.
I'll withhold my comments. I've already made my point twice.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Kevin, is there any way to address the situation Councilman Whelan's talking about with a commercial vehicle being parked on a city street every night,
Well,
every week of the year?
depending upon what type of vehicle it is, I mean, it's banned now.
It's a trailer, and it's a low trailer. It's 3 to 4 foot off the ground. It's got a canvas cover on it. It's all rusty. It's like the paint trailer we had out in front of City Hall for 3 months.
Does it have a commercial
Before you-
logo on it?
Pardon?
Does it have a commercial logo on it?
It does not, but it is a commercial trailer. The person who owns it takes it to his work site and pulls his tools out of it. How do I know that? Neighbors tell me that.
The current ordinance doesn't address
Sure.
trailers.
Okay.
Council, it's before you to amend the original motion, the 48 hours removal of 2,500 feet. Any further discussion on the amendment by removing 23-372? I'll move forward. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
I heard one nay. That amendment does pass. We're now back to the original. Sorry.
Why don't you call a vote?
Be happy to call a vote. All those that were not in favor of the previous motion, please raise your hand. Noting two there, Lisa. Thank you very much for the correction. Moving back to the original moment, it's in motion and second. I'll entertain any sort of discussion there from council. We are moving forward with potential policy, so I will open it up for committee here in terms of any public comment. Hearing and seeing none, all in favor of the original moment's motion, say aye.
Excuse me, Mayor. The original motion for Daryl, or are you talking about the original motion as presented by staff for the very long?
No, from Mr. Cruz.
language?
Mr. Cruz made the original first motion. Yep, yep.
So you're talking on for the 366?
With the
But-
deletion of 23-372.
Right.
Is this the staff recommendation, or?
No, this is the original motion, only motion made by Councilman Cruz and seconded with council for the, I'm paraphrasing, the 48 hours removal by 2,500 feet by complaint or in the different discussion that was had there. Anything further comment on the original? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Nays again, please raise your hand. Note the two again. The motion does pass. Thank you. Moving on to item 5, there's actually a bills and payroll motion for July 19th and August 2nd, since we had the additional week. Is there such a motion, please?
So moved.
Motion second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. This concludes this evening's Committee of the Whole meeting. We'll reconvene at the top of the hour for the regular meeting. Thank you.